Imagine a bottle of Jim Beam bourbon sitting on a shelf, rich amber liquid, decades of history inside. But have you ever wondered how it's made? From the golden cornfields of Kentucky to charred oak barrels aging for years, every drop follows a 220-year-old tradition. It starts with pure limestone-filtered water, a secret yeast strain from the Prohibition era, and a meticulous distillation process that gives it its signature smoothness. The real magic happens in the aging warehouses, where time and wood craft the perfect bourbon. So how does Jim Beam turn grain into liquid gold? Well, let's take a look. The story begins in the late 1700s with a man named Jacob Beam. Jacob was a farmer of German descent who settled in the beautiful rolling hills of Kentucky, very close to my home. Now, the fertile soil was perfect for growing corn, and Jacob had plenty of it. Instead of letting the surplus go to waste, he decided to distill it into whiskey. In 1795, Jacob sold his first barrel of Old Jake Beam sour mash, which marked the birth of what we now know as Jim Beam bourbon. Jacob's legacy didn't end with him. His son David Beam took over the distillery in 1820. David had a vision to expand the family business. He embraced new technologies of the Industrial Revolution, upgrading the distillery and increasing production. He also renamed the bourbon Old Tub, aligning it with the distillery's name. In 1854, David's son, David M. Beam, foresaw the importance of transportation in business expansion. He relocated the distillery to Nelson County, Kentucky, which was strategically positioned near newly established railroad lines. This move allowed for easier distribution of their bourbon across the nation, turning it into a national brand. The early 1900s brought significant challenges. James Beauregard Beam, affectionately known as Jim, took the reins of the family business. However, the Prohibition era forced the distillery to halt production. During this time, Jim dabbled in other ventures, including coal mining and citrus farming, but his heart remained with that good old brown Kentucky bourbon. With the repeal of Prohibition in 1933, thankfully, Jim Beam, at the age of 70, rebuilt the distillery in Clermont, Kentucky, in just 120 days. Since he no longer owned the rights to the Old Tub name, he branded the bourbon as Colonel James B. Beam Bourbon, which eventually became simply known as Jim Beam. His dedication ensured that the family tradition continued. Post-Prohibition, Jim's son, T. Jeremiah Beam, joined the family business, and he played a pivotal role in introducing Jim Beam bourbon to international markets, sharing their Kentucky spirit with the world. The Beam family's innovative spirit didn't stop there. Booker Noe, Jim Beam's grandson, introduced the small batch bourbon collection in the late 20th century. This collection included unique bourbons like Booker's, Basil Hayden's, Knob Creek, and Baker's, each offering distinct flavors and showcasing the family's commitment to quality and craftsmanship. Today, the legacy lives on with Fred Noe, the seventh-generation Beam family distiller. Under his guidance, Jim Beam has continued to innovate while honoring time-tested traditions. The brand has introduced new expressions and flavors, appealing to both longtime bourbon enthusiasts and newcomers alike. If you ever wondered how bourbon is made, well, you're in for a treat. It's not just about mixing ingredients and then letting them sit. There's an art and a science to it, shaped by history, laws, and a little bit of patience. Now, first things first, water. Water always is the foundation of bourbon, but not just any water. Water in the Bluegrass State is special. The state sits on a vast limestone shelf, which naturally filters out impurities like iron while enriching the water with minerals. These minerals play a crucial role in fermentation, helping yeast thrive and develop bourbon's signature flavors. This unique geological advantage is why over 95% of the world's bourbon is produced in Kentucky. Without this naturally purified water, the rich, smooth, and complex taste of bourbon wouldn't be the same. But it's not just a tradition, it's science and nature working together to create something extraordinary. Have you ever heard of a mash bill? Well, that's a fancy way of saying the recipe for bourbon, and it starts with 3 key grains. Corn. Now, corn is the backbone of bourbon, legally required to constitute at least 51% of the mash bill. Its high sugar content imparts a natural sweetness to the spirit, leading to flavors that are reminiscent of caramel and vanilla. This sweetness balances the spicier notes from other grains, creating a harmonious flavor profile. The prominence of corn is what gives bourbon its characteristic smoothness and rich mouthfeel. Next up is rye. Rye adds a distinctive spice to bourbon, introducing flavors like black pepper, allspice, and sometimes a little bit of mint. This grain brings a boldness to the spirit, offering a lively and robust tasting experience. High rye bourbons, like Bullet, for example, contain about 28% rye in its mash bill and are known for their pronounced spiciness and complexity. Then you've got malted barley. While malted barley typically makes up a smaller portion of the mash bill, it plays a crucial role in the production process. Its primary function is to provide enzymes that convert starches from the other grains into fermentable sugars during mashing. Although it doesn't contribute strong flavors, malted barley adds subtle malty or toasty notes, which enhance the overall complexity of the bourbon. These ingredients combine to create the foundation of every bourbon's taste. Now, let's get into how the bourbon is actually made, and it all starts in a massive still, one that in some distilleries runs almost non-stop. Fermentation is where the magic really begins. After mixing grains with water and cooking them, yeast is added to the mash, kicking off a process that converts sugars into alcohol. Over several days, this mixture ferments, creating a beer-like liquid called distiller's beer. It's cloudy, mildly alcoholic, and full of flavorful compounds that'll shape the final bourbon. Different yeast strains influence the taste, which adds hints of fruit, spice, or even a floral note. Now, while this beer isn't exactly something you'd want to drink straight, it is the foundation of every great bourbon, setting the stage for the next crucial step: distillation. Or at least the first distillation. Once fermentation's complete, the distiller's beer gets pumped into a towering column still. This is where things start to separate. Literally, heat gets applied, and that causes the alcohol to evaporate and rise. Now, while the heavier water, grains, and unwanted compounds all stay at the bottom, the alcohol vapor is then collected and cooled, which turns it back into liquid. This first run significantly increases the alcohol concentration, although it's not quite bourbon yet. What remains is a raw, rough spirit full of flavors that are waiting to be refined further in the second distillation stage. After the first distillation, the liquid, now called low wine, undergoes a second refining process in a doubler or pot still. Here, it's distilled again to remove more impurities and concentrate the alcohol, turning it into what's called high wine or new make spirit. This is the fresh, unaged bourbon, clear, strong, and bursting with bold, grain-forward flavors. Though it hasn't touched a barrel yet, you can already taste that sweet corn, spicy rye, and hints of malted barley. From here, the spirit is ready to make its final transformative journey, and that means aging in charred oak barrels. At this stage, it's bourbon in its purest, most unaged form. But it's not quite ready yet. Bourbon gets 100% of its color and about 70% of its flavor from the barrel, but making those barrels is a process of its own. Now, great bourbon starts with great barrels, and that means selecting the right wood. American white oak, which is primarily from the Ozarks, which is down toward Missouri, is the top choice because of its strength and unique flavor compounds. Distilleries work with loggers to ensure trees are harvested sustainably, balancing tradition with environmental responsibility. The wood's grain structure is key. It allows bourbon to seep in and out, extracting flavors over time. Now, some distillers even handpick specific trees, believing slight variations in the wood impact the final taste. This careful selection process ensures that every barrel contributes to bourbon's signature smoothness and complexity. Once harvested, the wood that's not immediately turned into barrels. Instead, the wood is stacked outside, exposed to the elements for months, sometimes years even. Rain, wind, and sun naturally break down harsh tannins that can make the bourbon overly bitter. This process, known as seasoning, mellows the wood and enhances its ability to impart rich vanilla, caramel, and spice notes. Some distilleries prefer longer seasoning periods, believing it results in a smoother final product. By the time the wood's ready to be crafted into barrels, it's been transformed into the perfect vessel for aging world-class bourbon. Once the barrel staves are assembled, it's time for the fire. The inside of each barrel gets torched for about 55 seconds to create a deep alligator-like char, known as the level 4 char. This step is crucial because it caramelizes the wood sugars, which adds deep flavors like toffee, vanilla, and smoky spice. The char also acts as a natural filter, helping to mellow out harsh flavors during aging. The intensity of this burn influences how the bourbon interacts with the wood, shaping its color, aroma, and taste. Without this process, bourbon wouldn't have that signature richness. Now, building a bourbon barrel is a craft that's passed down for generations. Each barrel gets assembled by hand, without a single nail or drop of glue. Instead, the staves, which are carefully cut oak planks, are tightly fitted together and held in place by metal hoops. The precision of this process ensures a watertight seal, which allows the bourbon to age without leaking. And the final step, adding the barrel's head and testing it for any gaps. Once complete, it's ready to be filled with new make spirit and begin its long journey of transformation into bourbon. It's old school craftsmanship at its finest. Now, once filled, these barrels are rolled into warehouses to begin aging. Bourbon's got to be aged for at least 4 years to be considered straight bourbon, but many brands will let it sit much longer. Here is where Mother Nature takes over. Hot summers make the bourbon expand into the wood, which soaks up flavors. Cold winters cause it to contract, which pulls those flavors back into the liquid. The cycle repeats year after year, and the longer bourbon ages, the more complex its taste becomes. Before bourbon goes in the barrel, its alcohol content has to be lowered to 125 proof by adding water. After aging, more water might be added to bring it down to the desired bottling proof, like 80 proof for Jim Beam, for example. This step ensures every bottle will taste just right. Bourbon ages differently depending on where it's stored in the warehouse. The top floors get hotter, leading to more interaction with the wood, while barrels on the bottom will age more slowly. To keep things consistent, Jim Beam blends barrels from different parts of the warehouse to ensure every bottle will taste the same. For smaller batch bourbons, fewer barrels are used, and for single barrel varieties, each bottle comes from one unique barrel, meaning every bottle has a slight variation. After years of waiting, the bourbon is finally ready. The barrels get rolled out and the bourbon is filtered, proofed, and bottled, ready to be poured into a glass. And just like that, the journey from water, grains, and wood turns into a rich amber liquid that bourbon lovers cherish. So the next time you sip on a glass of Jim Beam bourbon, remember it's more than just a drink, it's history, science, and craftsmanship, all in every drop. And there you have it, the journey from grain to glass, a tradition steeped in Kentucky tradition, craftsmanship, and a little bit of magic. Every step from selecting the wood to charring the barrels plays a role in creating that smooth, flavorful bourbon that we all love. Now we want to hear from you. What's your go-to bourbon? And do you prefer it neat, on the rocks, or maybe in a cocktail? For me, I like the Keeneland Breeze. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more fascinating stories behind your favorite drinks. Cheers!